Hey guys, Liana here. Yeah, we're talking about the South by Southwest Interactive Brouhaha. Ironically enough, there was no Mountain Monday because I was literally on a mountain. Um, I stayed at my friend who lives in Vermont, and she lives actually on the mountain where there's no cell service. Coming back from Salem, Massachusetts, some of you may have seen my Twitter feed. I was down there covering a Harry Potter cosplayer group at Halloween in Salem. I thought this was an awesome hook. Speaking of awesome story hooks, this South by Southwest brouhaha has clearly been seen as newsworthy by both gaming services and non-gaming services. I pulled some of the non-gaming services. I left this one up because I wanted to show you guys, look outside of the gaming services. And yes, I am using some archived website things just because I found they display better on this particular thing. But I tried to take a lot of those out and show, actual video game. Jezebel is not a video game website, but it comes in on the other side of this because what happened was there were two panels at South by Southwest coming up. One was a State of Games journalism panel. Another one was something called Level Up Overcoming Harassment in Games. I will hold off on my thoughts about that title. I will get to that. But you can see the names from this. It was Randy Harper. I don't know who Carolyn Cinders is, and Catherine Cross. Two out of those three are partisans in more ways than one. And, hopefully Carolyn Cinders is there to provide balance. I don't know. But the other panel, is it here? Oh, there's a panel featuring pro Gamergate speakers has also disappeared from the schedule. That was they're not showing it here. And this is the problem, like I said, archive copy. This is the problem with covering stories from a single perspective. You miss data. Online hate mob of Gamergate. Oh, jeez. I swear this article did it just because of the title. South by Southwest cancels online harassment panel because of harassment. This is sometimes why people run with stories, because it's got a great headline, harassment canceled due to harassment, threats of violence. That's, you see the articles. I landed on this Mashable one and pulled up the full version because it actually shows, here we go. Level Up, that was the one panel, would have featured Randy Lee Harper, Carolyn Cinders, and Catherine Cross in a data-driven discussion of how abuse factors into larger gaming communities. That's interesting because we don't have data yet. And they would also have looked at the various ways harassment can be combated on the design side of game development. All right. The other one is Save Point, was to feature journalist Lynn Walsh, adult entertainment star and game designer Mercedes Carrera, and indie game dev Nick Robelik in a talk moderated by the Open Gaming Society founder Perry Jones. The original panel pitch later a plan to discuss the current socio-political landscape in the gaming community, the journalistic integrity of gaming's journalists, and the ever-changing gaming community. And that was seen as the pro Gamergate panel. And you'll notice down here, the Save Point speakers have all been connected to the Gamergate hate group as defined by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Lynn Walsh, that they refer to as just a journalist, is the president-elect of the Society for Professional Journalists. And this article connects her to a hate group. And we wonder why we need to worry about ethics in the games press. And that isn't an ethical violation so much as it probably is just an error. Somebody not especially familiar with the territory. They're just like, who is Lynn Walsh? Oh, she's a journalist and she was on an SPJ panel, connected to Gamergate. Technically accurate. However, it's misleading to say that Lynn Walsh is in any way really connected to Gamergate. She spent large portions of the afternoon session looking completely confused. For most of the journalists involved, this was their first exposure in any meaningful way to Gamergate. But there is clearly a sort of pro faction and an ostensibly, pro a certain political orientation in gaming. I mean, in this Level Up panel, because it's three women. It's not harassment of people. These are, at least in Randy Harper and Catherine Cross's. And you notice I'm trying very hard not to link Carolyn Cinders into this because I don't know what she does. And they're clearly of the opinion that there is some unique and overwhelming problem facing women on the internet. That is their opinion, and there's nothing to counter the opinion. So what South by Southwest decided to do is, instead of getting people to talk on a single panel, which isn't going to happen, they decided to do one panel with one slant, for lack of a better term, and then another panel that I guess they assumed was going to be openly pro-Gamergate. I'm telling you, with Lynn Walsh there, that wasn't going to happen. One of the things that was awesome about the Airplay discussion is that journalists like Lynn Walsh were actually saying, well, this part's okay, this part's okay, this part's okay. Okay, you have a point there. But she is not a true believer when it comes to Gamergate in the slightest. And I think that would have been interesting because there's nobody there who is one of, the really, really, I mean, the most high profile pro Gamergate person on that panel is Mercedes Carrera. And, she obviously has interests and beyond Gamergate. So, I mean, that was an interesting mix of people. It maybe, in situations like this, well, I'm getting ahead of myself because I want to talk about the fact that they canceled the panel, and I'm going to move back to this one because there's ads running on that one. Sorry guys, it's part of the reason I used archive sites in some places, because these websites scale, so they force the ads onto the page no matter how much you zoom in. It's very frustrating. But there's two things going on here. The fact that these panels were canceled because of threats of violence made. And then the media explosion subsequent to that, because it's, a good story for a lot of websites. Because it's got that great headline, anti-harassment panel canceled due to harassment. I mean, that's a hook. But first of all, the whole idea to cancel the panel because of threats. I understand why South by Southwest canceled these panels. South by Southwest is a huge endeavor, and you can't risk everyone's potential safety. I mean, I believe the actual risk was quite low, but I can understand why an organization is not prepared to take that risk. As an event organizer myself, albeit on a much smaller scale, there have been times where I have decided to go ahead despite risks, and other times I've decided it's just not worth the risks, if that makes any sense. And I think that these troll threats, and that's what they are as far as anybody can determine, are just that. They are third-party trolls. It isn't pro-Gamergate. It isn't anti-Gamergate. It is trolls who have figured out that whenever something like this happens, there is a huge explosion of headlines. That's lulls, and so you're going to get trolls. So we have an issue now that South by Southwest did the correct thing or one of the correct things. It is a fair decision to make based on what they were facing. But it's also the reality that this sort of attention, not the cancellation of the panel, the subsequent media attention of the cancellation of the panel feeds trolls. It feeds the trolling. So that's what I sort of wanted to focus on today talking about, because this is a difficult problem. This is a catch-22. And the first thing I want to say, as somebody who's done a lot of conventions, you pitch panels and the convention has the right to say, yes, we're going ahead. No, we're not going ahead. And it seems to me, based on the stories going on, I'll jump back to the Jezebel one to show you guys, the way the media found out about this here particular story is that one of the panelists on the Randy Harper, Catherine Cross panel sent the email. It was Randy Harper sent the email that the panel had been canceled. Now, this is someone, I want to reiterate, this is someone claiming to have anti-online harassment strategies feeding trolls. I have pitched panels on both the Gamergate controversy and, women in games journalism and women in gaming, things like that, to various conventions. Only one has taken me up on these panels, and it wasn't the women in gaming panel. I don't go to the press and say, they canceled our panel, because they have the right to. Is it fun? Do I feel that it's fair that I keep getting shut down when I try to talk about my experiences in, over 10 years of writing about video games? It doesn't feel very fair. But, I don't like the fact that it seems to be the people who scream the loudest and the people who go to the media whenever they get a no that are being held up as the biggest names on this issue. Because when you do come at it from an anti-harassment perspective and making this a media issue, which is basically the cancellation of a panel, which happens all the time, it's not morally wrong. She has the right to talk about anything with a journalist that she wants. The problem is that it does feed harassment, because the minute this makes the press, you get lulls. And if you get lulls, you get more trolls. Now, some articles are reporting that it was not until the allegedly pro-Gamergate panel was announced that they started getting threats. And I will remind people that pro-Gamergate and anti-Gamergate events have both been sent threats, bomb threats, threats of violence. So the theory pushed by certain people in the press who are clearly not fans of Gamergate, and it's fine to be fans of Gamergate, it's not fine to jump to conclusions because of your own bias. These people insist that this is Gamergate trying to shut down people who disagree with them. And that's not the case, as far as anybody who has actually looked into this issue meaningfully can determine. Both sides are getting it. And it's just, the thing about trolling is that it's not any ideological attachment to the topic. It's that there's a lot of attention on this stuff and people lose their minds and act irrationally. So it's, if you're just trying to show what idiots games writers are or tech writers are, Gamergate is, it's a lull cow. It is amazing how quickly people will write completely unconfirmed stuff the minute the word Gamergate enters the equation. And so this is a troll's playground. And so the only real way to combat this, the only way to stop the threats, is to stop reporting on the threats on this particular issue. If I were in South by Southwest position, I would say we're going to record these panels and we're going to put them on the internet. They're not going to be live and we're not going to announce where they are. And I wouldn't even tell people they did it until after they did it. But I would continue to let the panel go on, just not in public. Because they are getting, these trolls are getting lulls, and the funniest thing for these trolls is probably the fact that they threatened both sides. They threatened the threat started after the Gamergate panel was announced and Gamergate got blamed. For a troll, that's hilarious. I admit the asshole part of me finds that hilarious too. I feel bad for the sincere people still part of Gamergate, and unfortunately they're dropping off more and more each day because it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it for me. I talk about it just so people know, like, why are you still talking about Gamergate if it feeds the trolls? Because I continue to talk about it in a way where it shows I'm not afraid of it. I'm not going to avoid talking about it where it's relevant, and I'm not going to avoid people who talk about it. But I'm also not I'm not evangelizing or proselytizing for the movement. I disagree with a lot of its tactics. Gamergate participants know that. The participants in core Gamergate, they may not like me very much for it, but they don't, make me miserable over it. They know those are my views. There is a splinter group for people who don't want to bother following this, and I don't blame you. There is a splinter group of Gamergate called GG Revolt that isn't so nice, and they have, made things an ongoing issue, but they're not the Gamergate boards that everybody is after. Things like Kotaku in Action and stuff like that. And I continue to talk about Gamergate because it's something that happened in gaming. I'm not going to treat it like a boogeyman. I'm not going to treat it like that. Don't say their name, they're up here, because that's silly. It doesn't matter how loud or how abusive some people involved in this thing are on both sides. That is not going to stop me from talking about it logically. And it's the logically part that has been lost in a lot of the press coverage of this. And part of the reason I'm trying to talk about this from a neutral perspective is I'm concerned about the rhetoric. I'm concerned about the vitriol involving this. These are, a journalist, a porn star, and a game designer walk into a bar sort of thing. That's what I would have called the panel personally. But this has turned into some sort of extension of a hate group. In what alternate universe? It has some group called Gamergate a hate group. I'm sure they have. Personally, I don't feel like an organization that has some bad actors as opposed to an organization whose stated principles are the and the thing is that groups, even truly bad actor groups, don't come out and say we want to wipe women out of this place or we want to get rid of black people or whatever. They use euphemisms, and this makes it difficult. But I know that there are people who consider themselves pro Gamergate who want more women in video games. They're just concerned with a particular type of activism, and those are the ones that have mostly moved on because it's just not worth being associated with something that's been labeled a hate group. Now, what that means, though, is that anything that gets labeled a hate group is compromised, and so it rewards inflammatory rhetoric by making the participants have to disprove a non-event. You can't prove a non-event. And this is my concern about going, you're a hate group. Well, no, we're not. Prove it. It's very hard. It's very, very hard. And does this mean Some people within Gamergate, some people within anti-Gamergate haven't done completely hateful things without any real punishment from the respective groups. No, people have totally done horrible stuff. But I've worked with a lot of organizations. The worst ones for me were environmental groups. And that's just my personal experience. I'm not saying that environmental groups are especially bad. I'm just saying the ones that I was involved with. I left those groups because I didn't like the tactics, and I felt like they were angry and hateful, and they weren't trying to educate people. They were trying to lash out at the world. And so I couldn't be a part of that. But does that mean I believe that those specific groups are hate groups? No, I don't believe that. It's not the same thing. And whenever you have a cause, you're going to have radicals in that cause. And there's this weird theory right now that moderates for a viewpoint are enabling the radicals for a viewpoint. And that means that we're not allowed to have opinions, because anybody with an opinion, people can, that is exceptionally unhelpful thinking. Because what does it mean? Well, it means nobody can take a firm stance on anything. It's an apathy paradigm. The only way to show you don't support a radical is to care about nothing. And that is bad for innovation. That's bad for social progress. That's bad for social justice. That you can't have a moderate perspective on anything. We need checks and balances. We need people from both sides of the table talking. And we're not getting that in games right now. We're not getting that in a lot of other spheres of life either in terms of discourse. But, games is the one I know best. So let's summarize, because I just wanted to sort of get some ideas on the table. Should South by Southwest have attempted to do these panels? Yes, I think they had merit, both of them, even though I think it's pretty clear I very much disagree with Randy Harper and Catherine Cross on a lot of things. I think that people have the right to talk and tell their opinions. And if people want to hear those opinions, great. If people don't want to hear those opinions, well, they're going to be talking to an empty room. That's free speech. And free speech doesn't just count when I like the speech. So I think that people like Randy Harper and Catherine Cross have a right to speak, even though I disagree with them. Do I think also that they made the right choice, or that they made a right choice, and I'm talking about South by Southwest, in canceling the panels? Yes, I do. I think that any conscientious organizer has the right to cancel something if they feel like the safety of the overall conference or the continuity of the overall conference will be disrupted. That is within their rights. Where I think the error was made in terms of combating online harassment was Randy Harper sending that email to a journalist, because that's where the lulls came from. That's where this big brouhaha came from. Otherwise, it would have been removed quietly from the schedule, or they would have retooled or figured out something. Instead, we have a media firestorm, and we're giving the trolls precisely the lulls they're looking for. But the last thing I want to touch on that is concerning me about this issue is the idea that if a reporter, in this case Lynn Walsh, talks to someone to collect a story, they are suddenly in support of that faction they're interviewing. That is not allowing a reporter to do their job. And this is very important, because I think of the numerous people I've interviewed over the years who I am not a fan of, but you're professional and you gather the story and you don't put in snide little things. If they're going to hang themselves, you let them hang themselves with their own words. I had to interview Rob Ford when he was still a city councilor twice, and he was an asshole both times. But he was a city councilor. He was a counterpoint to things like homeless advocacy. And by a counterpoint, I mean he outright opposed any program that helped the homeless. In news, you have to have people for and against an issue on a topic, and that means you are going to encounter people with which you do not agree. And if you have to interview someone you don't agree with because that's who the news director sent you to interview, and all of a sudden you're accused of supporting their viewpoint, well, that's suppression of a free press. And that's moving us towards a propaganda-based system. And that really bothers me. So I hope this gave you something to think about. I hope you found this informative, and I hope this shows that these things can be discussed without everything going crazy, because I think that's the most important thing. These things continue to happen because gaming right now is even easier than usual pickings for trolls because of people's tendency to go histrionic at the slightest mention of Gamergate or the slightest mention of a harassment of somebody who happens to be a woman.